Hello guys, what's up? What's up? Let's read. Okay. Keys to power. In the past, an entire nation would be ruled by a king and his handful of ministers. Only the elite had any power to play with. Over the centuries, power has gradually become more and more diffused and democratized. This has created, however, a common misperception that groups no longer have centers of power, that power is spread out and scattered among many people. Actually, however, power has changed in its numbers but not in its essence. There may be fewer mighty tyrants commanding the power of life and death over millions, but there remains thousands of petty tyrants ruling smaller realms and enforcing their will through indirect power games, charisma, and so on. In every group, power is concentrated in the hands of one or two people, for this is one area in which human nature will never change. People will congregate around a single strong personality like planets orbiting a sun. To labor under the illusion that this kind of power centers no longer exist is to make endless mistakes, waste energy and time, and never hit the target. Powerful people never waste time. Outwardly, they may play along with the game, pretending that power is shared among many, but inwardly, they keep their eyes on the inevitable few in the group who hold the cards. These are the ones they work on. When troubles arise, they look for the underlying cause, the single strong character who started the story and whose isolation or banishment will settle the waters again. In his family therapy practice, Dr. Milton H. Erickson found that if the family dynamic was unsettled and dysfunctional, there was inevitably one person who was the stirrer, the troublemaker. In his session, he would symbolically isolate this rotten apple by seating him or her apart from the others, if only by a few feet. Slowly, the other family members would see the physically separate person as the source of their difficulty. Once you recognize who the stirrer is, pointing it out to other people will accomplish a great deal. Understanding who controls the group dynamic is a critical realization. Remember, stirrers thrive by hiding in the group, disguising their actions among the reactions of others, render their actions visible, and they lose their power to upset. A key element in games of strategy is isolating the enemy's power. In chess, you try to corner the king. In the Chinese game of Go, you try to isolate the enemy's forces in small pockets, rendering them immobile and ineffectual. It's often better to isolate your enemies than to destroy them. You seem less brutal. The result, though, is the same, for in the game of power, isolation spells death. The most effective form of isolation is somehow to separate your victims from their power base. When Mao Zedong wanted to eliminate an enemy in the ruling elite, he did not confront the person directly. He silently and stealthily worked to isolate the man, divide his allies, and turn them away from him, shrink his support. Soon the man would vanish on his own. Presence and appearance have great import in the games of power. To seduce, particularly in the beginning stages, you need to be constantly present or create the feeling that you are. If you are often out of sight, the charm will wear off. Queen Elizabeth's Prime Minister, Robert Cecil, had two main rivals, the Queen's favorite, the Earl of Essex, and her former favorite, Sir Walter Raleigh. He contrived to send them both on a mission against Spain. With them away from the court, he managed to wrap his tentacles around the Queen, secure his position as her top advisor, and weaken her affection for Raleigh and the Earl. The lesson here is twofold. First, your absence from the court spells danger for you, and you should never leave a scene in a time of turmoil, for your absence can both symbolize and induce a loss of power. Second, on the other hand, luring your enemies away from the court at critical moments is a great ploy. Isolation has other strategic uses. When trying to seduce people, it's often wise to isolate them from their usual social context. Once isolated, they are vulnerable to you and your presence becomes magnified. Similarly, con artists often look for ways to isolate their marks from their normal social milieux, stirring them into a new environments in which they are no longer comfortable. Here they feel weak and succumb to deception more easily. Isolation then can prove a powerful way of bringing people under your spell to seduce or swindle them. You will often find powerful people who have alienated themselves from the group. Perhaps their power has gone to their heads and they consider themselves superior. Perhaps they have lost the knack of communicating with ordinary folk. Remember, this makes them vulnerable. Power, though they be, people like this can be turned to use. The monk Rasputin gained his power over Caesar Nicholas and Caesarea Alexander of Russia Through their tremendous isolation from the people, Alexandria in particular was a foreigner and especially alienated from every Russian. Rasputin used his peasant origins to insinuate himself into her good graces, for she desperately wanted to communicate with her subjects. Once in the court's inner circle, Rasputin made himself indispensable and attained great power. Heading straight for the center, he aimed for the one figure in Russia who commanded power. The Tsarina dominated her husband and found he had no need to isolate her, for the work was already done. The Rasputin strategy can bring you great power. Always search out people who hold high position yet who find themselves isolated on the board. They are like apples falling into your lap, easily seduced and able to catapult you into power yourself. Finally, the reason you strike at the shepherd is because such an action will dishearten the sheep beyond any rational measure. When Hernando Cortes and Florencio Pizarro led their tiny forces against the Aztec and Incan empires, they did not make the mistake of fighting on several fronts, nor were they intimidated by the numbers arrayed against them. They captured the kings Moctezuma and Atahualpa. Vast empires fell into their hands. With the leaders gone, the center of gravity is gone. There is nothing to revolve around and everything falls apart. Aim at the leaders, bring them down, and look for the endless opportunities in the confusion that will ensue. Image: a flock of fatted sheep. Do not waste precious time trying to steal a sheep or two. Do not risk life and limb by setting upon the dogs and guard the flock. Aim at the shepherd, lure him away, and the dogs will follow. Strike him down, and the flock will scatter. You can pick them off one by one. Authority: if you draw a bow, draw the strongest. If you use an arrow, use the longest. To shoot a rider, first shoot his horse. To catch a gang of bandits, first capture its leader. Just as a country has its border, so the killing of men has its limits. If the enemy's attack can be stopped with a blow of the head, why have any more dead and wounded than necessary? Chinese poet Tu Fu, Tang Dynasty, 8th century. Reversal: any harm you do to a man should be done in such a way that you need not fear his revenge, writes Machiavelli. If you act to isolate your enemy, make sure he lacks the means to repay the favor. If you apply this law, in other words, apply it from a position of superiority, or so that you have nothing to fear from his resentment. Andrew Johnson, Abraham Lincoln's successor as U.S. President, saw Ulysses S. Grant as the troublesome member of his government, so he isolated Grant as a prelude to forcing me out. This only enraged the great general, however, who responded by forming a support base in the Republican Party and going on to become the next president. It would have been far wiser to keep a man like Grant in the fold, where he could do less harm than to make him revengeful, and so you may often find it better to keep people on your side where you can watch them than to risk creating an angry enemy. Keeping them close, you can secretly whittle away at their support base, so that when the time comes to cut them loose, they will fall fast and hard without knowing what hit them. Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others. Judgment: coercion creates a reaction that will eventually work against you. You must seduce others into wanting to move in your direction. A person you have seduced becomes your loyal pawn, and the way to seduce others is to operate on their individual psychologies and weaknesses. Soften up the resistance by working on their emotions, playing on what they hold dear and what they fear. Ignore the hearts and minds of others, and they will grow to hate you. Transgression of the law. Near the end of the reign of Louis, all of France seemed desperate for change. When the king's grandson and chosen successor, the future Louis, married the 15-year-old daughter of the Empress of Austria, the French caught a glimpse of the future that seemed hopeful. The young bride, Marie Antoinette, was beautiful and full of life. She instantly changed the mood of the court, which was rank with Louis' debaucheries. Even the common people who had yet to see her talked excitedly of Marie Antoinette. The French had grown disgusted with the series of mistresses who had dominated Louis, and they looked forward to serving their new queen. In 1773, when Marie Antoinette publicly rode through the streets of Paris for the first time, applauding crowds swarmed around her carriage. How fortunate, she wrote her mother, to be in a position in which one can gain widespread affection at so little cost. In 1774, Louis died, and Louis took the throne. As soon as Marie Antoinette became queen, she abandoned herself to the pleasures she loved the most, ordering and wearing the most expensive gowns and jewelry in the realm, supporting the most elaborate hair in history. Her sculptor coiffures rising as much as 3 feet above her head and throwing a constant succession of masked balls and feats. All of these whims she paid for on credit, never concerning herself with the cost or who paid the bill. Marie Antoinette's greatest pleasure was the creation and designing of private Garden of Eden at the Petit Trianon, a citadel on the grounds of Versailles with its own woods. The gardens at the Petit Trianon were to be as natural as possible, including moss applied by hand to the trees and rocks to heighten the pastoral effect. The queen employed peasant milkmaids to milk the finest looking cows in the realm, launderers and cheesemakers in special peasant outfits. She helped design shepherds to tend sheep with silk ribbons around their neck. When she inspected the barn, she would watch her milkmaid squeezing milk into a porcelain vase made at the Royal Ceramic Works. To pass the time, Marie Antoinette would gather flowers in the woods around the Petit Trianon or watch her good peasants doing their chores. The place became a separate world, its community limited to her chosen favorites. With each new whim, the cost of maintaining the Petit Trianon soared. Meanwhile, France itself was deteriorating. There was famine and widespread discontent. Even socially insulated courtiers seethed with resentment. The queen treated them like children, only her favorite mattered, and these are becoming fewer and fewer. But Marie Antoinette did not concern herself with this. Not once throughout her reign did she read a minister's report. Not once did she tour the provinces and rally the people to her side. Not once did she mingle among the Parisians or receive a delegation from them. She did none of these things because as queen she felt the people owed her their affection and she was not required to love them in return. In 1784, the queen became embroiled in a scandal as part of an elaborate swindle. The most expensive diamond necklace in Europe had been purchased under her name, and during the swindler's trial, her lavish lifestyle became public. People heard about the money she spent on jewels and dresses and masked dancers. They gave her the nickname Madame Deficit, and from then on she became the focus of the people's growing resentment. When she appeared in her box at the opera, the audience greeted her with hisses. Even the court turned against her. For a while she had been running up her huge expenditures. The country was headed for ruin. 5 years later, in 1789, an unprecedented event took place. The beginning of the French Revolution. The queen did not worry. Let the people have their little rebellion. She seemed to think it would soon quiet down and she would be able to resume her life of pleasure. That year, the people marched on Versailles, forcing the royal family to quit the palace and take residence in Paris. This was a triumph for the rebels, but it offered the queen an opportunity to heal the wounds she had opened and establish contact with the people. The queen, however, had not learned her lesson. Not once would she leave the palace during her stay in Paris. Her subjects would rot in hell for all she cared. In 1792, the royal couple was moved from the palace to prison. As the revolution officially declared the end of the monarchy, the following year Louis was tried and found guilty and guillotined. As Marie Antoinette awaited the same fate, hardly a soul came to her defense, not one of her former friends in the court, not one of Europe's other monarchs, who as members of their own courtiers, royal families, and all the reasons in the world to so that revolution did not pay. Not even her own family in Austria, including her brother, who now sat on the throne. She had become the world's pariah. In October of 1793, she finally knelt at the guillotine, unrepentant and defiant to the bitter end. Interpretation. From early on, Marie Antoinette acquired the most dangerous of attitudes. As a young princess in Austria, she was endlessly flattered and cajoled. As the future queen of the French court, she was the center of everyone's attention. She never learned to charm or please other people, to become attuned to their individual psychologies. She never had to work to get her way, to use calculation or cunning or the arts of persuasion, and like everyone who is indulged from an early age, she evolved into a master of insensibility. Marie Antoinette became the focus of an entire country's dissatisfaction because it's so infuriating to meet with a person who makes no effort to seduce you or to attempt to persuade you, even only for the purpose of deception, and do not imagine that she represents a bygone era, or that she is even rare. Her type is today more common than ever. Such types live in their own bubble, seem to feel they are born kings and queens and that attention is owed them. They do not consider anyone else's nature, but bulldoze over people with the self-righteous arrogance of a Marie Antoinette. Pampered and indulged as children, as adults, they still believe that everything must come to them, convinced of their own charm. They make no effort to charm, seduce, or gently persuade. In the realm of power, such attitudes are disastrous at all times. You must attend to those around you, gauging their particular psychology, tailoring your words to what you know will entice and seduce them. This requires energy on earth. The higher your station, the greater the need to remain attuned to the hearts and minds of those below you, creating a base of support to maintain you at the pinnacle. Without that base, your power will teeter, and at the slightest change of fortune, those below will gladly assist in your fall from grace. So that's it, guys. Bye.